Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Pink and Channels. A lovely sunny Thursday lunchtime here in Norfolk. Obviously, a long trip to Burnley tomorrow evening, 5 to go in the Championship. Maybe not a lot to talk about on the pitch, but plenty to talk about off the pitch over the last week. So, of course, we'll work through all those talking points for sort of the next 40 minutes or so. Adam Harvey, joined by my colleague Connor Southwell for your preview show. Of course, we want your comments, questions, score predictions around any of those matters, whether that be on or off the pitch. And of course, we'll work through those as we go through the show. Connor, let's just start with Tuesday evening, 0-0 draw against Sunderland, successive home clean sheets, which of course I think is a huge positive. You can wrap all the context around maybe Norwich playing with a little bit more freedom now. You know, there's not really much to play for over the course of this season, but on the whole, against a good opposition, a relatively positive performance.
Yeah, I thought so. I came away kind of thinking, particularly the first half, and look, I know there'll be people shouting at the screens now that there's obviously mitigation. Sunderland were without really key players. No Joe Bellingham, no Mundle, who's injured. Obviously, Isidore was on the bench. Patrick Roberts was on the bench. Enzo Lefebvre is coming back from a fitness issue as well. So you do have to wrap all of that context around it. They needed a point to secure their place in the playoffs. So I think it's fair to say they probably came to Carrow Road with that being their sole ambition. But yeah, in the context of playing team fourth in the league and on the back of what we saw last Saturday at Home Park, I think it was a big improvement, particularly that first half, particularly that opening 30 minutes where I thought their play had more zip, had more energy, had more intent about it. And probably to me, and it was interesting to hear sort of Johannes say this after the game as well, it felt like what they want to be, everything they want to be in terms of a team that has lots of the ball, but can actually create chances, can actually restrict opponents to very little. And it was the first time I think we've seen, maybe, I'm sure we have seen it this year, but off the top of my head, certainly for a little while, where, you know, Duffy and Cordoba were really high up. They were really aggressive in their positioning. They had, so they forced Sunderland to put 10 men behind the ball, and, you know, barring maybe Borja Sainz connecting with a shot a little bit better, or Anis Ben Slimani's header moving a few inches to the left and hitting the inside of the post and going in. They probably deserved to lead at that point. Second half, I thought, was a little bit more of a non-event. Sunderland responded. And obviously, without creating a lot, Gunn had to produce a couple of saves, but I don't think they were the level that he did against West Brom a couple of weeks ago, if I'm honest. So it petered out a little bit, and yeah, I thought it was probably a necessary point. And again, 2 clean sheets in successive home games, given that prior to that they'd kept 1 all season, I think is pretty good going as well. So yeah, 4 points from West Brom and Sunderland. I think if you'd have offered most people that ahead of those 2 games, then people would have taken it. Obviously, what they wouldn't have taken is the Plymouth defeat and the nature of it in the middle. So yeah, it can be spun however you want to spin it. But I thought there was plenty there to like and plenty of positives. And if they can replicate that moving into next season, I think they'll be a far better Championship team in terms of results.
Yeah, you mentioned next season. I think most people are probably looking for sort of glimmers of hope, I suppose, more moving into that. And one of those, I think, is probably the man that Finley's mentioned here. 2.3 million for Jacob Wright is daylight robbery. What a player he is, and what one for the future. I was going to ask you about him, Connor, because I thought that 45 minutes he played at Home Park, he completely changed the sort of course of that game. Norwich in the first half, pretty flat, minor the sort of first 20 minutes spell, and he came on, that sort of metronomic player that just makes Norwich tick, and he sort of showed that and displayed that. And then again on Tuesday night, for me, he should have got the man of the match award. I thought he was absolutely superb, just everywhere in terms of the intensity and just growing in confidence. And sort of, we're starting to see those flashes of quality more and more over a consistent sort of basis. When he first got dropped in against Preston, I thought he struggled a little bit, obviously getting used to the Championship and obviously playing at a men's senior level, not, played at sort of any of those sort of, played a little bit for Man City, I suppose, in sort of flashes, but not over a consistent period of time. But one that clearly they want to get done, and you spoke to him at Home Park, clearly one that he wants to stay as well. So it all feels pretty positive on that front.
Yeah, he's pretty good, isn't he? From what we've seen, and I think the big thing for him, and it's the same, probably not just for him, but whenever there's a player that comes in from a Premier League academy, maybe not played that much senior football, and maybe it's their first loan move, it can be difficult, that first loan. I mean, ask Lewis Dobbin and ask other players that Norwich City have had, Ken Abbo, you could go back as long as time. They're difficult often to get right and to come back in and to play. And I agree. I thought for that Preston game and probably the opening 15 minutes of Hull, you were looking at it and he looked raw. He looked exactly what he was, which is a player who hadn't played any senior football. But I think since that moment since about halfway through the first half at Hull. I think he's been. I don't want to big him up too much, but I think exceptional probably isn't too strong. I think he's been excellent in every game that he's played. For me, what I really liked about the performance Tuesday night, yes, it's the technical stuff, it's the composure he has on the ball, it's his range of passing, it's the tempo and the control that he gives Norwich City when he's in the side. Absolutely, all of those things I think were huge, and you spoke about it there. But what I like more was the physicality, the use of his body, the ground he covers. There was a bit more meat to his tackles as well. That is the side that for me, I was looking at and going, well, that's the bit I'm not quite sure about yet. And, to see him in the second half use his body nicely to sort of spin Alan Brown off the ball, who's an experienced Championship campaigner, pretty physical by his nature, was really impressive. And to have that zip about him is probably the bit which I was looking at going, that's the bit I want to see more of. Particularly in that sixth role, which obviously commands that you do a little bit of that. You can't just be pretty and nice in possession. And he's not, to be fair. I think I'd like to see him break lines a little bit more with his passing, but I think that will come with confidence. And I was told actually when I started this job, and I'm sure it's the same for a young player really, which is when you walk into anything, any new situation, you play a little bit like a test match opener. You just, you play a couple of defensive shots, you feel your way in. And then after you get to about 30, 40 runs, you begin to open up and play some shots. And it feels like that's where we are with Jacob Wright. He's beginning to open up and maybe find some gaps to play some excellent shots in. And, we were speaking about this on Tuesday night. I think it's always a good marker of a midfield player in particular, where when they receive the ball, they've got space and they've got options. And if that is the case, they receive them in 5-yard pockets and they've got at least 2 passing options. That is a good sign of a very good player. And, I played in that position at a very lower level, and it's not easy. He makes it look easy, but it's difficult to have your mind constantly switching, to be scanning, to be, making yourself available all the time. And to be doing that at 19, I think is incredible. And of course, there are elements that he needs to improve, and it won't always be like this. There's going to be dips in form and performance, but yeah, the fundamentals are really clear, and it's looking increasingly like a really clever bit of recruitment to pluck a player who hadn't played a senior minute out of Manchester City to attach a buy option, 2.3 million plus I think 500,000 of add-ons as well, which has been left out a little bit, but still a very good price even at that. And I think, barring a major injury between now and the end of the season, I would be shocked if Norwich City don't activate that option. And that, of course, gives them first dibs, really, to try and sign Jacob Wright. Obviously, I asked him that question at Home Park, and sometimes you ask a player that sort of question and you expect them to, not to keep going back to the cricket analogies, but to play a little bit of a straight bat and to give it a little bit of a, we'll see. There's plenty of football to go. We'll see how it goes in the summer. And I was almost taken aback by how definitive he was in terms of 100% want to stay, really enjoying it. And, that's hugely positive. So the player's willing, the coach is willing, the club are willing. That's a pretty good place to be in. But obviously, it's not something I don't think that will move to the end of the summer, because if they did it now and then he did his ACL, everyone I think would be turning around and going, well, why the hell did you activate it early? Maybe in a similar way to conversations around Anis Ben Slimani are happening at the moment. So, yeah, one for the summer, but he's been probably the major positive of the last week, I would say.
Yeah, certainly one I'm looking forward to seeing more of, hopefully next season. One of obviously the talking points that came out of the game on Tuesday night, Onel Hernandez. There's been a lot of talk around him, I suppose, over recent weeks, and maybe some of his activity online. Liam saying, do you think Onel plays for the club anymore? It's obvious he loves the club, but he can't do what he did. Obviously, it's kind of the liking, I suppose, of relative posts. Maybe questioning certain individuals within the football club. You can kind of... I feel it's one of those where there's clearly no malice from him. He's, obviously gone down and liked a lot of the comments. I know you've done a piece on this morning, Connor, that, it was excellent and kind of outlined the situation with him. But where do we suppose move forward with him now into these last 5 games? Do you expect him, I suppose, to be in and around the squad tomorrow night? It's clearly Torp, wanting to try and address it from top to bottom in terms of, we saw it with Duffy, we saw it with Cordoba, these situations, they can't go unpunished, but clearly one that, there was no malice, no intent from him in terms of, sort of trying to, I suppose, cause issues within the group.
No, I really don't. I really don't believe so. And as I wrote this morning, there have been examples this season where there have been negative comments, and he's replied to them, asking people to be. I'm paraphrasing, but asking them to be a little bit more positive and to be a little bit more supportive of what's going on. So, no, I think it was probably a mistake. Well, it definitely was a mistake on his part, but I don't think it was attributing his name with the views of that particular comment, and the person that commented it have they're absolutely right to their opinion. But of course, when you're employed and when you are working under a coach, that's not the best way to go about things, I think. And it's difficult, and I find it quite difficult because with footballers, I think there's so much, particularly now, we've had a whole debate sort of nationally, in the last week or so about why isn't there creativity in the game? Why aren't there personalities in the game? Why aren't there mavericks in the game? Well, if we don't want beige answers and media trained answers and players saying anything just to avoid a little bit of controversy or to cause any sort of disagreement from anyone, then you have to accept that you're going to get players who maybe act like Onel does. And I think there's so much of what he does in social media that's really good. It's taking fans closer than they will ever get and than we will ever get. And, that level of insight is unrivaled. Nobody else can offer that. So that's good. But I think as Finley said there's been probably a few examples. I wouldn't necessarily say over the last few months. I'd say probably seasons where it's maybe felt like it's got a little bit close to the line. And there was an example recently, wasn't there, after the Sheffield Wednesday game? I think it was. There were some posts that were highlighted, and I think they were sort of met with frustration internally, and that was seen kind of as the final chance, really. And obviously, that line's been crossed again, probably. And I think really Johannes had no choice but to make the decision that he made on Tuesday. It's a shame because Norwich probably could have done with him in the closing stages of that game, particularly where the wide areas were, whether you subscribe to the view that he's what he was or whether he's capable of producing. But, over and above all else, I mean, this is a player who's been at Norwich City for a long period of time. Kenny McLean, I think by 2 days, is the only longer serving player at the football club. And he has had some brilliant times here in terms of the 2 title-winning seasons. The moments I will remember Nottingham Forest for probably as long as I live as an incredible moment. He played a key role in obviously the Coventry goal earlier on the season with Mankwa Forsen, but the goal at Middlesbrough you can think about, and that winger that he was in 18-19, where he did produce a lot of goal contributions, and he was a major part of the team, and equally as well, and I've seen it and people see it as well with fans that wait around the South Stand. He is more than happy to give his time and more than happy to give his time, which I think is the biggest thing that a footballer can give. Often they can sign something or pose for a picture, and that's kind of the end of the interaction. It never really feels like that with Onel. And, I'll be honest, every time I see him, he stops for a conversation. He's very polite. He's happy to speak. And, not all of them are like that. So I agree with you. I don't think it was about malice. I don't think it was about agreeing with the comment necessarily. I think it was probably just an error. Whether he didn't read it, I don't know. I can't speak for him because he's not here. But it was a mistake. It's been dealt with, and as per, I guess, probably the Cordoba ones and the Duffy one, you would hope to see him, in the matchday squad, not just for tomorrow, but probably for the last final for the five games, because I think we're probably in a world where that is realistically going to be his last 5 for Norwich City. And it would be really sad if that was the end of his Norwich City journey. I think he probably deserves a chance to say goodbye to people, and fans probably deserve a chance to say goodbye to him, even though, I recognise in all quarters he's not the most popular figure. I get that. I understand that. I understand the footballing criticisms. But purely as a human being and what he's done for the football club, I think he does deserve that right to say goodbye. So hopefully he is afforded that, and I think he probably will be.
Inevitably, a lot of the questions are sort of more around topics away from the game on Friday night,
Are
which
they?
you kind of understand. But let's just talk a little bit about the game, because we kind of have to. Finley said, could we go back to a back 3 tomorrow night, similar to the West Brom approach? Obviously, Johannes Torp was asked that question post that game, and sort of, I think Paddy phrased it, would you sort of go back to that? And he sort of said it depends on the opposition, depends on the players available. Obviously, Turf Moor, Burnley, we know everything about them. We'll talk a little more about them in just a moment. But what sort of setup, I suppose, you expected? Is that a potential game you could see Torp, changing it back to a back 3/5?
I don't think it will make much difference, is my honest answer. Look, potentially. I think it depends, doesn't it, on the options that they've got available. And he spoke a little bit post-match about how he's going to have to rotate his squad because, and we saw it, Schwartau went off with a dead leg, Slimani had cramp, Nunez had cramp. I think all of those 3 will travel and will be okay. But obviously without anti-Cianats and whatever they decide to do with Onel as well, that's a light squad that they're going to be travelling up with to Burnley. It doesn't really allow for a lot of manoeuvre. I would probably anticipate that Marcondes would come in. But yeah, formation-wise, would it surprise me if they went to a 3? No. But I think on the basis of the way he spoke about them defensively against West Brom, but also on Tuesday night against Sunderland, I think you'll probably be inclined to go for the 4 again, if I'm honest, because it's an opportunity to try, I guess, and see these players now, which is what the rest of the season has to be about, see these players in his style of play to make those definitive judgments on whether they're here or not next season. And you know, it's interesting in some I don't think we've put them up yet, but they'll be up tomorrow. He speaks about kind of how players maybe need to decide whether this style of play is for them as well. So we're better to do that than one of the best teams in the league who haven't lost the game at home, who've conceded 5 goals. That's the sort of challenge that I think he will learn a lot about his group and in terms of the players who maybe will and won't be here next season. And we're not talking purely about those under contract or out of contract. We're talking about those under contract as well. So, I think he'll stick with a 4 is my feeling. Would it surprise me if he went back to a 3? No, because clearly the way they played against West Brom was successful. But Burnley aren't a team typically. I know they've had a lot of the ball in certain games, but I think they're also quite happy to play without the ball. And that sort of tussle for possession is going to be interesting. And yeah, I think they will stick with a 4 purely because, again, of the left-back options. Clearly, Kenny McLean did a pretty good job in there. The emergence of Jacob Wright as well. I think that probably allows you to stick with a 3 rather than perhaps go to a 5 and stick Fisher at left wing-back and Stacey on the right, which didn't work at Plymouth. And they were carved open a little bit. So, I think they'll probably go with the same back 4 as what they did on Tuesday night is my feeling here and now, barring no new injuries, which is always the caveat.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that. Let's talk a bit about Burnley. You did sort of outline some of the metrics there. Unbeaten at home, only 12 goals conceded over the course of the season, 29 clean sheets, second in the division, only on goal difference behind Leeds, 2-point buffer to Sheffield United. I think there's probably a feeling they maybe missed a little bit of an opportunity on Tuesday night, a 0-0 draw away at Derby, which of course, given that Sheffield United lost at home to Millwall, there was an opportunity there to build that gap to 4 points, heading into these last 5 games. But the fact they play on the Friday night ahead of the other 2, that probably opens the door a little bit. I think Norwich have obviously been there in years gone by where you're playing ahead of maybe a couple of other rivals, and just that kind of mindset that can offer is huge. So with all that, and obviously there's also the elements around, reunions with certain players. I know Nathan Redmond and Aaron Ramsey, I think, are both out with injury, just to kind of allude to Jeffman's point. But of course, there's also Ashley Barnes as well, who made that switch back to Turf Moor in January. Marcus Edwards, the well-renowned Norwich City player of 6 minutes, also a Burnley player. So with all of that, what have you made of them so far this season, Connor, under Scott Parker? I know their kind of approach sometimes has been criticised.
Yeah, I completely forgot he existed, to be honest, for a moment, let alone play for Norwich City. Yeah, really interesting. Am I right in saying they're unbeaten in 28 as well, which is absolutely mega in terms of championship terms to go on that level of run, irrespective of how they've done it. I think it's hard to speak about Burnley and not speak about their defensive record. I mean, 5 goals conceded at Turf Moor all season. To concede 12 in total is absolutely insane to do that in a championship season. You know what this league is like and the level of teams that you face. So I think it might not have been the most exciting. I think we could probably even say it's been dull for the most part, but goodness me, it's been effective to have 85 points at this stage of the season, to have an opportunity to move up to 88 with 4 games to go and to put themselves top of the table. It's going to be a big night for them, and there's no way of kind of hiding that. And Norwich, again, with very little to play for, will they have the same motivation as a collective? Probably not, if we're being brutally honest, because minds do get focused at this stage. That being said, that pressure can sometimes be a bad thing. And going into a game like this with a little bit of freedom isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. So, yeah, look, it's been an interesting season. I'd love to know what their fans think of it. I can imagine it's a really mixed kind of view in terms of how they've got promotion or how they could potentially get automatic promotion, but if they beat Norwich, it's a major step. Although I think Sheffield United are away at Plymouth, but we know firsthand that's not a gimme at any stage of the season. Obviously, on the back of two defeats as well for them, and Leeds have Preston. So I wouldn't say they're absolutely guaranteed to pick up points in either of those. So Burnley will be looking at this game at home under lights on Friday. Gives you that extra motivation to try and get a yard ahead of those that you're competing against and apply some pressure on them. So, and the way it's gone over recent weeks, it's been quite topsy-turvy, hasn't it, in terms of those results? They're not free scoring. That's the one thing you would say. But clearly, when we talk about Norwich and defensively, as much as we've spoken about 2 clean sheets in 3, you worry that with the quality that Burnley have, with the errors that Norwich City make on a consistent basis, that they're going to create chances and have the quality to take them as well. So it's going to be a really difficult night, and I think it's difficult to come on here and inject any sort of optimism or enthusiasm, maybe not, but certainly optimism. and hope maybe that Norwich City can nick something. But they've drawn with Derby. They've picked up a lot of draws this season, and that maybe is where the success can lie. Because if Norwich City can keep it a 0-0 for long periods of time, and I understand that's a big if, but then there's the opportunity. We know that the quality that Norwich have at the other end in terms of Sargent and Sainz and Marcondes if he plays, and Nunez as well. There is that potential that they can score, even against a defence as good as this, and James Trafford, a goalkeeper, as much as this. But yeah, I think it's one to endure, to get through, and then to look ahead to Portsmouth on Good Friday. So it's my honest feeling. Yeah, I'm with you, Finley. So yeah, a difficult task against a very, very good Championship opponent, but actually, I think it's going to be. I think Johannes may well take quite a bit from it in terms of the lessons that he learns about his team. What about you, Adam? How are you feeling?
Yeah, not overly optimistic, to be honest. Yeah, it's kind of one of them games where I think I'm almost hoping Norwich kind of take the approach a little bit to what we saw at the back end of last season when Bristol City came to Carrow Road and really frustrated Norwich and put on a good performance. Swansea done something similar where, you start to see those sort of green shoots, I suppose, moving into next season. Bristol obviously have clearly, under Liam Manning, built on what they were trying to do at the back end of last season. And this season, obviously, at the moment, they look in a pretty strong position to secure a top 6 place. So I suppose that's kind of what I'm hoping for going to a Turf Moor where Burnley have beaten over the course of the season. They've only lost 2 games. One of those was back in August. I think the other one was sort of October time against Millwall. So that just goes to show that the strength of that team, they just don't lose games. So it's going to be a tough test, but it ultimately will hopefully shape maybe some of these younger players that are sort of still trying to prove their worth. The likes of Jacob Wright, hopefully he can put on another good performance against a good team, and we can sort of come away from there feeling a little bit more optimistic, I suppose, around maybe these next season and the pre-season ahead. Obviously, a lot of people are wanting to talk about transfers, but let's just talk a little bit about a player that is in the building, but we've not seen much of quickly. Matej Jurasek, who, of course, I think at one point last week we felt was going to be involved against Plymouth. After the game, sort of said there was sort of felt a little bit in his quad after a training session before they came down to Plymouth. Then Monday, when he was asked around him, sort of again said the scan looked okay, but still struggling a bit with the intensity. And then there was obviously some more sort of quotes and some stuff around him after the game there on Tuesday night. Just going to quickly play the clip now, and then we'll talk a little bit about him and the situation.
Just cut more for Yanis. Yeah, too early for Jurasek. I mean, the way you mapped it out, it's not an injury, but you have to.
Yeah, but obviously, honestly, I don't really know because he's 100% struggling with the intensity. He's struggling with the physicality of the league, but at the moment there's no injury for us to find. So is the timing right? We have to be very, very careful about it. We're all frustrated about the situation, and he is probably the one who's most frustrated about the situation. But we simply need to find the right timing for us to bring him on. I hope it's Friday, but I'm probably not too optimistic about it.
Yeah, what do you make of all this, Connor? Because clearly he's a player for next season. That's what was signalled when he arrived, and I think you can accept that. But also, I think for the amount of outlay that Norwich have put into this asset, you're probably hoping to see a little bit of him in the back end of the season to sort of build him up into the Championship a little bit and get used to it ahead of next season. So the fact we've only sort of seen 83 minutes of him up to this point, is that a little bit concerning that he's still struggling to get up to the intensity levels?
Yeah, it is. It is. There's no way around it. And clearly, I can understand the frustration that the fans have because you bring a player in January for the money that Norwich City paid for him, which is big money by Norwich City's standards. And you want to see him play, you want to see him contribute, particularly when you see the issues, not issues, but the way that Norwich maybe haven't been as productive on that right wing compared to what they've had in other areas of their attack and the type of player he is as well. I think there was a lot of excitement around him, young. And still should be, by the way. And you can sense Johannes's frustration there because we're not talking about somebody who is injured. We're talking about someone who's struggling. And I think that's the key word. And all I would encourage, I think, generally, is just that people are a little bit careful that we don't create a massive pile on and we don't put pressure on clearly a young man who's struggling after what has been a major part of their, major big move in their life. And there are challenges that come with that mentally, and the fatigue element I think is clearly a concerning one. And ultimately we don't have enough information, I think, to say, well, clearly you can ask questions about it, and those questions I think we have asked, and we've asked pretty consistently, and you can hear Johannes's answer there, but you just worry maybe that there is something else that maybe is being dealt with in the background that people maybe need to give a little bit of thought for. And that doesn't mean you can't be frustrated that he hasn't played. That doesn't mean you can't ask him ask questions about what's happened or the process that Norwich City recruited or why Norwich City recruited him. I mean, this is not I don't want to say it's not a surprise, because that's not true, but I think also you can see through the minutes that he's played for Slavia over the years, and his last start came out, I think, years ago. Last night, full 90 minutes for Slavia came in a 7-0 win in, I think, 2022. So this is a man who has struggled generally for minutes, and clearly there was some very good competition with him at that club, but there maybe was some fitness points as well. So yeah, I think I would just urge a little bit of caution about maybe the way people are framing some of the debates and descriptions of him, because I know internally there's a lot of faith that there's a really good player in there, and at some point he will come back and he is going to play, and he will hopefully live up to those expectations. I think for him now, it's about park this season, forget about it, come back in pre-season and make sure your head is right, your body is right, and you're in the right position to come and affect a championship campaign. Because, and we saw this a little bit with Science last year, clearly slightly different situation. He got injured in pre-season, but it took a little while for him to get into the team. He was a little bit in and out throughout the whole of last season, actually. But, if we're talking about Borja Science now, nobody talks about that 3 months where he was in and out of the team and had to have that period really of building up. So that's got to be the case with Jurasek, and hopefully, he is a good player across the 5-year contract that they've given to him, and not sort of for the first 3 months where maybe it was a little bit tough. And it's often a bit that gets overlooked, I think, in football, where young men who are, some of them children still, some of them just into adulthood, living away from home. Oscar Schwartau, he's an 18-year-old living away from home, away from his parents for the first time in a foreign country. It's a lot to get your head around. And I think clearly he is a player that just needs a little bit of support. And I hope, and I'm sure he is getting that support behind the scenes. And hopefully, when the time comes that he is ready and capable to play, we see the best of him, because I think it could be as damaging at the moment to just say, well, just throw him in and he's not injured, so just throw him and just play him, and that be the route to getting the best out of him, because he's got to be in the right place. Otherwise, there's no way they're getting the performance out of him that they need to get. And this season's done. Norwich aren't going to go up. They're not going to go down. They're going to be inconsistent for the rest of the season. They'll win a couple, lose a few as well, I'm sure. And they don't really desperately need him at this point. Would it be nice? Absolutely. But the key is him performing next season and being able to do that to the best of his ability. So, yeah, that is my thought on it. But like everyone else, incredibly frustrating situation for everyone. And I'm sure, as Johannes said, at the heart of it, he is probably more frustrated than anyone else, because it's a big moment for his career, a big move to England. And as you said, he's played, 84 minutes and started one game and hasn't played since February. So, not good.
No, I've actually seen him start a game, ironically, for Slavia Prague in August 2023. So I'd have to actually check back whether that was the last time he played 90 minutes. I was over there a few years back. So it
was a 7-0 win, I think. I can't remember who it was against.
I think that was the game I was at. So they beat
Tetris.
I think it was 6-7-0. And he's definitely saw him play and start in that game. So yeah, I'd have to check that, whether that was the one for 90 minutes. But intriguing if so. Jeffman saying, not sure if you talked about him yet. We have indeed, Jeffman. Jacob Wright is saying that Man City are happy to let him go for so little. Obviously, there's a lot more around transfers in and out, Connor. Let's talk a bit about this man, Shane Duffy, that Finley's asking around. Chris Reeve yesterday sort of intimating that he sort of heard around New York Red Bulls coming in for Shane Duffy, and maybe being a few talks there. Clearly one that's got, just over another year left on his contract by the time we reach the summer. Where are we at in terms of him, I suppose, in this situation? Clearly there's Brad Hills in the background, doing really well at Stockport. You've got Rory McConville, who hopefully we'll see a little bit more of between now and the end of the season, who, when he's played, has looked pretty good. So in terms of Shane Duffy, I think if we got to the summer and all parties could agree, do you think he's one that the club would be willing to move on?
Yeah, I think probably similar to an Ashley Barnes or Grant Hanley, if there was a situation that popped up for him that made sense for him and made sense for his family and made sense for his career, then I don't think Norwich would try and stand in his way. I don't know anything about Red Bulls or New York Red Bulls specifically, so I can't offer any extra insight on that. But I know there has been sort of in the background a little bit of chatter around him in the MLS for a little while, and I think he would be quite keen on that from sort of what I gather. I've not heard that from him directly, and who knows, maybe we'll get an opportunity to put that to him before the end of the season. But that has been the noise, so it wasn't a surprise to see that put out there. As far as the club are concerned at this stage, there's been no contact from anybody. There's been no offer from anybody. Shane Duffy hasn't come and spoken to them and said, look, I want to leave in the summer. None of that has happened. So he's still under contract. He's still, come the summer, we'll have 12 months left. And, until there is something that is presented in front of them, he is a Norwich City player. Now, could that happen? I think absolutely it could, for the reasons that we've spoken about. I don't think it would be the worst thing for him in the world to go and play in the MLS and probably get out of the country for a little while, to be frank, and have a little bit of a fresh start. I think that would be good for him, and clearly where Norwich are at as well, they're not going to be. We know the strategy, we know the way they're going. It's very unlikely that we're going to be sat here next summer with Shane Duffy getting offered a new deal. So if he could this summer go and find himself 2 years at an MLS club on decent money, let's be honest, it is over there, and prolong his career for an extra 2 years compared to one, and have that added security and go and give himself a wonderful life experience to finish his career, you could see why that would make a lot of sense for him, and you've outlined the reasons why it would make a lot of sense for Norwich as well. And increasingly sort of the whispers you hear are that may well be a position that they're active in this summer. I could see it working for all parties if the right option presented itself, but that's the big if. The right opportunity has to present itself for him, for the club, and that's not always a given, as we've seen. So yeah, a bit of watch this space on that one.
Yeah, obviously plenty of incoming stuff. One man that is currently in the building that I think a lot of Norwich fans are hoping they might potentially be bringing back for next season, of course, Lewis Dobbin, who unfortunately is injured at the moment, but certainly over the sort of bulk of period that he was available, showed his quality, and I think most fans took to him. Clearly unlikely to get minutes at Aston Villa, given their sort of situation at the moment. So in terms of him, is he one that I suppose could be back next season, whether that be on loan or on a permanent basis?
I think he could be. It will be a loan as well, I think, at this stage. And look, clearly Norwich negotiated a move for him in January, didn't they? And as part of that, as we kind of understand it, there's a first refusal there at least to try and get him back on loan. Now, obviously, as part of that, Lewis Dobbin has to want to come back, and there may well be other options for him in the summer. But certainly the sense you get having watched him play, and I think you could see it. You could see him growing in confidence. You could see him improving in front of our own eyes, I think, in Johannes Hoftorup's system. So, if there was that opportunity, I think, and he was willing, and that's the key part. If he is willing, I think it happens, to be honest, because Norwich will be keen to do it. I think even given maybe some of his injury struggles, you get a little bit more security when you sign the player on loan compared to a permanent deal. And I think we'd all agree that he showed enough in that loan spell to get that. And, I think actually Tuesday night was quite a good example of where Norwich missed him and missed that sort of bit of pace and that ability to stretch a team, particularly in the closing stages of the game. Clearly, Borja Sainz is going to be of interest elsewhere this summer. So, yeah, I think there's a world where Norwich City start next season with Lewis Dobbin back on a season-long loan, and obviously with Jacob Wright permanently. And I think if I'm a supporter, I'd be incredibly enthused about both of those possibilities becoming a reality. But of course, they've still got to happen. The players have still got to agree to them, and I'm sure both players will have different options. And just because we're in a position where Norwich are maybe in the box seat and are in the driving seat, the players still have to agree. And whilst I think probably all parties are pretty confident both of those would at this moment in time, football's a funny old game, and we saw last summer just how quickly things can change and how sort of interest from elsewhere can turn heads. So it's never a gimme, but yeah, I think there's a confidence around both of those two that you sense at the moment.
Yeah, a few people asking around another winger who there was a sort of tentative link to this morning. You can sort of question the reliability of the source, but Poku of Peterborough, Finley saying, I've seen the Poku link this morning, source not the best. Anything in that? BN as well on YouTube saying, sorry if this has been spoke around, any truth in the Poku rumours. I mean, clearly a free agent this summer, Connor, as things stand. No contractual situation been resolved with Peterborough. You look at his numbers in League One over the last couple of years, clearly the age profile, the sort of position he plays in, given the situation around the wingers, we spoke around maybe Hernandez potentially departing, signs, likely probably going to be leaving the football club. Clearly there's going to be an opening there for Norwich to look at sort of those wider areas. But these rumours and the fact that he's doing so well with a League One club, going to be a free agent, inevitably there's going to be a lot of clubs coming in for him, you'd imagine.
Yeah, so the honest answer on this is I don't know. It's not one that I've heard. It's not a name that I've heard, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true at this stage. I'm always a little bit wary, and I think you make some good points on the source of this. I would also make the point that I'm always a little bit wary when you see sort of 4 or 5 championship clubs lumped in on one player. That tends to mean that it's been pushed out there by an agent a lot of the time. So yeah, I think at this stage it's still very, very early. You're going to get a lot of what we describe, and we speak about this a lot between ourselves, as kind of kite flying at this time of year, where you get maybe agents and representatives of players begin just to try and get their client's name out there. That's their job. That's what they're employed to do. So no problem. I'm sure he'll have lots of championship suitors. His profile fits. That's something you would say. He's had a really good season in League One. I think he'll be a good signing for somebody this summer. Whether that's Norwich City or not, I'm not quite sure. And we'll do our best to try and do a little bit more digging on that. But as we speak now, sometimes it's best to just say I don't know. And at the moment, I have no idea if he's a player that Norwich City are in for or not. So we'll try and ask some questions and see if we can get to the bottom of that one. Hopefully by the next time we're on a record.
Yeah, certainly one I'd like to see in a Norwich shirt. You look at kind of their record, I suppose, of buying Peterborough players down the years. The Adam Juries, the Russell Martins, the Ryan Bennetts. They have sort of typically always had a little bit of joy. And there was, of course, the Hernandez link, I suppose, over January. So clearly Norwich have been in Peterborough and having a look at him. So you'd imagine they would be aware of Poku. Bish on YouTube saying, assuming our big 4 leave in the summer, Gunn, Nunez, Sarge and Sainz, will they buy first team ready players or more project players in your opinion? Obviously, I suppose he's talking there around maybe the age of the players they might be bringing in, Connor. I mean, we've obviously had that question in recent press conferences. Sort of basically intimated that they're not sort of, I suppose, adverse to bringing in a player who's sort of 28 because that still fits what they're trying to do. So in terms of players that arrive in the summer, where do you sort of maybe pitch the bracket, I suppose, in terms of the age of the players?
Yeah, well, look, they've got a strategy for a reason. That is their strategy. So I would be shocked if suddenly they pivoted and signed a load of players who are 26 to 32. That doesn't really feel like it's likely to me. I think we're probably likely to see. I think I'm with you. I think they'll probably try and sign more players in that age group because they're going to lose more from kind of the 24 to 29. That's the group that I'm looking at the moment and feeling like that's where they need to add and balance out the squad a little bit, because you can't just have young players. You can't have a group of young players. We saw in the autumn when they had injuries what that can look like, and often you don't achieve consistency often with that. You need a balance and you need a good spine. So I think they'll probably have to go a little bit higher. I wouldn't expect them to be signing what they did 2 years ago, where they were signing 30-year-olds and 31-year-olds on 2 and 3 year deals. I think it will be maybe around 25 to 28 bracket. I could see probably a few more from that this summer. It was only Marcondes, wasn't it, last year, and he was post transfer window. Other than that, I think they were all 23, 24 and below. So I probably don't see it being that drastic because for the reasons that commenter said there, they're going to need options who are to nick a phrase from the political world, not one that I would really use in any other context, but they need kind of oven ready players this summer, don't they? And it was interesting to hear Johannes speak. I can't remember what press conference it was. You might remember, where he was speaking about maybe the domestic market and looking at the Championship and maybe some of the players available. And you look at the out of contract players, and I think there's some good options there in terms of players who maybe could come in and impact things from a Norwich City perspective. So I'd expect a more mixed approach, but I still think underscoring it all will probably be that commitment to this strategy that they've embarked upon, because if they suddenly pivot in the other direction, then I think we'd probably be asking questions about the faith they have in it. So yeah, it'll be like anything else about balance. It depends who goes, it depends where they're sort of pitching at in terms of financially, but I don't see a massive pivot in the other direction. But that being said, I could probably see a few more players in that sort of upper age bracket that we spoke about, between about 25 and 28.
Yeah, one individual that was kind of, I suppose, headed up or sort of an assistant head of the recruitment department, Mariella Nitasaki, has decided to depart the football club. A few people asking comments around that. Finley saying, shame to see Mariella depart, did very well in her role. Who she's helped bring to the football club definitely deserves a role higher up. BN saying, how much of a massive blow for the summer window is Nitasaki, and long 8 years obviously at the football club. How long have the club known about it? Have they been able to prepare for her departure? And is she leaving to a fellow Championship club? So I suppose there, in terms of the questions, Connor, I mean, where's her future lie, and maybe where did Norwich City lie in terms of who they're going to, I suppose, step up to that? Will they go and search for someone externally, or will it be more of an internal, somebody promoted?
They will hire a replacement. I think sort of from the noises, it sounds probably more likely to be internal rather than external. But there's no one in post yet. She left the club officially last month, so you'd imagine there would have been a notice period served of some degree. So I can imagine the club have known this probably for a little while. And to be honest, her stock and how highly rated she is within the game, she's very well connected. She's done a lot of conferences with a lot of very talented people within the game and knowledgeable people in the game, and I'm sure they will have done the work already, as similarly they did with kind of Palash and with Clements last summer, when it was pretty clear the direction of travel that things were heading in with their respective futures. They had options ready to go and in the wings, and I think it will be the case this time around. So will it blow things? Of course not really. You've still obviously got Lee Dunn there who leads the department. It's still Ben Napper. Those two will be the people who obviously lead that strategy and do a lot of that work. They've got a very deep kind of recruitment staff around them, both from sort of a data perspective and from a physical scout perspective as well. So I think it'll be business as usual. Clearly it's a blow because she did some very good work at a time in the club, and I think you can only look at that. Amy Buendia, obviously maybe the headline that people speaks about, although I think during or since he came through and signed to when he left, there was about 8 people who took credit for signing Amy Buendia. So it's hard to know exactly who found him, but I think it was a collective effort. She was a part of that. You look at their work in South America, she did a lot of the leading work in that and helped really establish and lay the groundwork for what that is. 2 scouts now over there. I wonder probably if that part maybe is the one that might get left a little bit now she's opted to go. In terms of where she goes next, I don't know. I think it'll be a bigger step to a bigger club. I don't think it'll be a championship one. All I've sort of heard at the moment, I don't have a name, but an English club and potentially a sort of wider role within a football group. So we can probably think of a few clubs that maybe are involved in that type of description that would fit the bill. Not from any knowledge, but Forest, for example, part of a football group, Greek owner. She herself is Greek. You could understand there being a connection there. Not to say that's definitely where she's going to, because we don't know at this stage. But it's a blow. But I think the club probably will be well insulated for, because there will have been an expectation at some stage that she moved on, I think, to bigger and better things.
Yeah, still plenty of comments to get through. Finley saying, "Good afternoon, lads. Are you bringing your boots if we need a left back?" I thought Kenny McLean done pretty well there the other night, though.
Yeah, things are never that bad.
Rob with a slightly jokey comment. Which of these happens first? Norwich win the Champions League and the Club World Cup, or Matej Jurasek is available to play some minutes in the Championship? I still probably just pinned towards Matej Jurasek, I'd imagine.
Yeah, that's harsh, Rob. That's harsh. A B, I would say, yeah.
Finley saying, will Svartal be available tomorrow? Obviously a little bit typical in that there's no press conference before this game, in that it was supplementaries on Tuesday night. So we're not fully adverse, I suppose, to this situation, Connor, unless you've sort of heard anything.
No, I haven't heard anything at the moment. It was a dead leg. I think the indication was that he would be available. But again, the way this season has gone, you can never, ever rule anything in or out. So ultimately, we will see. I think he'll probably be one of the ones that are rotated out tomorrow anyway, is my feeling after a start. I thought he struggled a little bit as well, actually, in that role, which is understandable because he's not played a lot of football of late. So, I think he'll probably be in the squad, but maybe not starting. But that's not based on knowledge. That's based on feeling.
Yeah, Rob with a question around the medical department saying, do you think the club needs a clear out of the medical department in the summer, boys? The club doctors and head physio have been here for donkey's years. Is it time for some fresh bodies and some fresh ideas, fresh personnel? So in terms of, I suppose, that department, there's obviously been lots of talk around the injury situation this season. And it's a question that was posed to Ben Napper in sort of the recent interviews around sort of January, February time. And Torrup's been asked around it at different points. So in terms of that department and I suppose the issues with injuries this season, is that something do you think the club will be, I suppose, aware of it and looking at this summer?
Well, if they aren't aware of it, you'd be a little bit concerned after the season they've had. So they'll definitely be aware of it. I think. Do I see them, getting rid of loads of people and bringing a load of new people in? Not really. I don't think that's the way they work. I think it'll be about process and about analysing whether there's anything they could have done differently. And like every department, if you sat down and did that, I'm sure there are, and I'm sure there are things that maybe they didn't. Funny enough, I spoke to someone in this world who works in a very similar role at another club, at a football club, who said on this that the thing that you never know, and this is the thing that we never know, you never know how many injuries those guys have prevented. And I think that's an interesting side to it. We don't know if they've been excellent at preventing injuries this season, because you only really notice when maybe there's an injury or there's a mistake. And equally, all those guys do really is offer advice to coaches. So we don't know if they are presenting the risk, and they will do. They will say player X, he can probably go for 60 minutes at maximum capacity, at which stage his numbers will drop off. But if a coach decides to play him and to play on and to not heed that advice and they get injured, we just don't know how many of those situations have occurred. So I think it's always a very difficult area to fully look at and analyse. Clearly, we're in a different world now to where we were 10, 15, 20 years ago with the technology that's available, and maybe players being overexposed potentially to information and scanning. I think that's an interesting debate as well. So I think it's just too complex an area to say, well, they've had a lot of injuries, therefore the people working in those departments might be bad. That luck is a factor as well. It might have just been a case of bad luck, although you would look over the last few seasons and maybe dispute that. But I don't think you can completely rule out coincidence as a potential. But one thing is for clear, whatever it is, whatever the root cause, they A, need to get to the bottom of it, and B, it needs to prevent itself from happening next season, because it's been a key reason, I think, why they've been so inconsistent and why they've been so unable to kick on. You think about, that run they had in sort of September time where they were putting teams away and they were playing excellent football. And I think we all sort of sat up and thought, yeah, what have we got here? And obviously then, you lose Sargent and some other core players, and it becomes very difficult. So, we'll see. I'd be surprised if there's a major in and out of that situation. It's more complex than that, to be honest, but clearly it can't be allowed to go on, and you would hope next season they're in a better position with it.
Yeah, definitely. We'll be live for another sort of 5 or 10 minutes. So any late comments, questions, score predictions, get them down below. Jeffman is saying, any inclinations, I suppose, on where the pre-season plans are? I kind of get the impression, unless you differ, Connor, that Torp wasn't a massive fan of sort of flying in and out of countries last year, sort of shorter camps. He's more sort of, I suppose, willing towards trying to have a longer camp somewhere overseas, and sort of maybe a couple of games in a country, and then I suppose a few more back over here in the domestic country.
Yeah, I think that's fair, Adam, because again, you think about the nature of that. If you suddenly go to 3 countries, you lose probably a day traveling there, and you lose a day traveling back. That's probably 6 days that you lose of a pre-season schedule, just through traveling and being on flights and going through that process and recovering from traveling. That's not an economic use of your time, really, and it's not the best use of your time. So I would agree. I think it'll be a camp in one place. I think it'll be a camp in a place that's not a million miles away. I think it's probably a camp from a place you could fly from Norwich. And we will see if and when that gets confirmed as to maybe where that is. But yeah, I think your assessment is a fair one. And you've got to remember as well, when we talk about the injuries and we talk about maybe some of that stuff, it was a pre-season that was designed by David Wagner really last summer. It wasn't one that Johannes Hoftorp took. He inherited that and obviously ran with it. It was too late probably really to make changes to it by the time that he arrived. And this summer he will get a chance to implement that, and clearly within that be able to utilize a lot more of his methodology. And you would hope that because of the nature of where they are this season, where there's not a new coach coming in and there's a lot in the air, but maybe it is a little bit more certainty that you can hit the ground running earlier because they're going to finish the season earlier. They're going to be able to, you would hope, do a bit more business than obviously no major tournament as well. So that helps things, and that should give them a little bit more of a head start this summer to really get going, alongside obviously having a really settled pre-season. And I've got no doubt in my mind that those players are going to be worked very, very hard. So I'm looking forward to pre-season, I think, actually, and getting away and enjoying some sunshine. It's always a nice part of the year, and we'll see where they end up. But I think it'll be good if you like Edam cheese, probably.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'm looking forward to that. Jeffman saying, where do you reckon we'd be in the table if there was no injuries this season? It hurts to think about. I suppose you're never going to go a whole season without injuries, but it has been one of them years where it just feels like everyone's been injured at some point, or all collectively been injured at the same time. So I suppose if Nunez signs, Sargent, Gunn, Cordoba, whoever has all been available all season, where do you think Norwich would have been, Connor?
Top 6.
I'd agree with you, to be honest, on that one. Jeffman saying, looking forward to the Fans Social Club live pod in May. Can't see any sausage rolls available, so chips will have to suffice. I think we need popcorn, should be good entertainment. Yeah, hopefully that will be a good event. Definitely get down to that and support the Fans Social Club, of course. Finley saying Amsterdam is going to have some youngsters in the streets. We'll see. Let's talk a little bit. We'll talk a little bit, I suppose, around the game now. We've been going for 50 minutes. How do you see it all unfolding at Turf Moor on Friday night, Connor? To buy Canaries saying we need to be tight, mean, defence-like, I suppose, given the way that Burnley will approach the game. So I can't see a load of goals, but stranger things have happened.
Yeah, they have. Look, it's a monumental task, isn't it? I think for Norwich City, there's no way of hiding it, and I think it's about being competitive and about applying themselves in the best way possible. I think they did, to be honest. I thought there was some good signs, probably more so at Bramall Lane than Elland Road, but I thought they were in both games without really creating too much. And clearly, best defence, best goalkeeper in the league tomorrow night is going to be a hugely testing afternoon and evening for them with the quality of players, not just in that starting 11 that Burnley have, but also off the bench to be able to impact and change a game if they need to. So, yeah, I'm under no illusions of the size of the task. And as I said earlier, I think it's one to endure, get through, and then look ahead to the Easter doubleheader. But I still think there'll be a lot in there to take. How close or not are Norwich to Burnley? How close or not are they able to play their style of play in an arena like Turf Moor and against an opponent like that? And how close or not are they to being able to get a result? These are all points that I think are really interesting. And within that, there will be success stories and probably players that step forward. That's what we want to see now. That's what the aim of this season is about. We've had Jacob Wright, who's the next one, who's going to put their hand up and say, yeah, do you know what? I really want to be involved. I really want to play. And it's an interesting one at the moment. I've been quite interested by sort of the reaction since Plymouth, and I can understand why it was like it was totally, particularly if you went to that game. I do think that some of Norwich's players have got off quite lightly with maybe some of the levels of criticism that has been thrown around. It's mostly been directed towards Johannes Hoftorp, and look, that's the name of the game, and that's fine, and he will probably prefer that. But I think that we're probably now in a place where there are four major camps in this Norwich City squad. You've got those who want to be here, Jacob Wright, and we've listed some of those guys who want to be here and are really looking forward to next season. Those who probably know they won't be. Those who probably won't be, and because they think they're going to go and play higher, and we can all think of those players, and then probably the final point, those that do want to be, but maybe are a little bit too young or aren't quite able to impact it yet, and those four camps at this stage of the season, it's going to be really difficult to get a collective that is capable of really producing a performance, and that's before you get into Norwich's abysmal away record. So all of that told, I think it could be a very difficult evening, but like you say, Adam, hopefully one where they're competitive, they produce a decent performance, and we see some flashes of what we saw on Tuesday night in terms of them being able to implement a game plan that hopefully they can take in next season against a really high quality championship opponent. If we see all of those things, I think we can probably leave Turf Moor with at least a little bit of optimism.
Yeah, I spoke to a Burnley fan this morning, and he kind of said that they've not really got a lot in terms of the striker department. Obviously, Lyle Foster, I think, went off injured against Derby and might be out for the rest of the season. Seemed to be sort of in tears as he left the pitch. And clearly, goals have been a bit of an issue for Burnley. I know they've sort of addressed it a little bit in recent weeks, and there's been a few sort of 4-5-0 wins. But over the course of the campaign, they're not really a free-flowing, goal-scoring team. Obviously, Ashley Barnes is there, and there's always that inevitability that he might potentially get a goal against Norwich. But yeah, I just think the first goal could be key tomorrow night. If Norwich could go there and just frustrate for 45 minutes and then they manage to get themselves ahead, obviously then it changes the whole dynamic. And if Burnley then have to come out a little bit and try and chase the goal and get an equaliser, Norwich have had joy at different times this season, on the transition. But the problem is if they go and concede an early goal, the quality that Burnley have got in certain areas that we saw at Carrow Road, that Fleming free kick. Brian Hill's got loads of goals this season from midfield. Defensively, they just don't give up opportunities and concede goals. As has been proven, Trafford probably been, by far the best goalkeeper in the league. I know Michael Cooper's probably in the conversation. Estev, the centre-back, I think has been one of, if not the best player in terms of the centre-backs in the Championship this season. So not going to be an easy task, but hopefully Norwich can put on a good show, as we've both outlined over the course of this show. We've been going for 55 minutes. I think we'll wrap it up there. Of course, we'll be at Turf Moor tomorrow night for all your coverage, Team News Live from 7 p.m. So intrigued to see who will be in the lineup and who won't. Of course, we've got all the usual build-up across our channels as well. There was no firm press conference, but we have got the sort of supplementaries over on our YouTube channels. You can go and hear what Torp has to say ahead of this one. As I mentioned, I spoke to a Burnley fan this morning, so a bit from their end. I think Sam's going to have tactics board up later as well. We had a chat with Ben Krezene and Tash Snelling as well during the week. So lots of good stuff on the YouTube channel and also all the good stuff over on the Pink and Plus app as well. So $2.99 a month So well worth checking that out. Obviously got all the columnists over there, Chris Sutton, Chris Gorham, Ewan Roberts, etc., and all the good work that the boys do. So well worth checking that out if you haven't already. So with that, we're going to sign off, and of course we'll be at Turf Moor tomorrow night. So we'll see you there. If you're making the long journey, safe travel. Hopefully Norwich can make the weekend a little bit better. If not, it's going to be another long week before we reach Portsmouth at home next Friday night.